Well, hello, little one. Welcome back to Oma's Rockin' Chair. And are you ready for the next installment from Hitty, her first 100 years? We're going to read from 2 more chapters in Hitty's story. So settle in, snuggle close, and just relax and rock with Oma. Listen to the fire and listen to the rain. And listen to what happens to Hitty next. Are you ready? Chapter 7, in which I learn the ways of gods, natives, and monkeys. I have often wondered if any other doll was ever called upon to play such a role as mine. Here I was suddenly chosen to be god to a tribe of savages, and with no more idea of what was expected of me than they would have had of how to behave in the church on Meeting House Hill. But in all fairness, I must admit that I have seldom been treated with more consideration. They made me a little temple of green leaves and bamboo shoots, to which I was conducted with great ceremony. I was set upon a sort of altar trimmed with pink hibiscus flowers. As soon as these drooped, fresh ones were brought, also small offerings in the way of fruits and shells. If the responsibility of saving the lives of Phoebe Preble and all the rest had not weighed so heavily upon me, I fear that all this attention might very easily have turned my head. As it was, I let the natives do as they wished with me, trusting to Providence that I might survive this experience as I had the others so far. I cannot say I was altogether happy when the chief, who seemed to have my welfare very much at heart, removed my garments one after the other, until I sat shamelessly upon my altar clad only in my muslin chemise. The only reason this had been spared to me was because of the red cross-stitched letters of my name, which, in spite of salt water and sun, had miraculously managed to keep some of their color. These seemed to attract their attention. I suppose they considered them some magic sign or spell that must not be broken. How I blessed the day that Mrs. Preble had suggested Phoebe sewing them there. I was also forced to undergo some rather trying attempts at decorating my complexion according to South Sea Island ideas of beauty. Bright juices were squeezed from various berries and smeared on my face and body, till I dared not think of the outlandish appearance I must be cutting. But this I endured, as I would have endured far more for the for the sake of those whose safety depended upon me. I did not object so much to some leaves and flowers they added, or to a lump of red coral that hung around my neck on a thread of grass. This I took to be some sacred talisman. I trusted that my being of mountain ash wood might keep off any evil power it possessed. In fact, I found myself counting for a great many things on those good properties which the old peddler had said were in me. Those were days in which I had need of all the power I could summon. It is rather lonely to be a god for days on end. Perhaps I should have felt differently about this if I had been able to understand what the brown men said to one another when they made their queer gruntings before my temple. But they never knew if I felt bored or frightened. I continued to smile down upon them as serenely as I had been back on a state of Maine mantelpiece. I had been made with a pleasant expression, so it was really no credit to me. I longed above all else to know what had become of Phoebe and the others, but only once or twice did I catch the sound of familiar voices among the trees not far away, and once I thought I recognized Bill Buckle and Jeremy in the distance. How many days and nights passed thus I do not know, for I soon lost count of them in my new position. But it was during this time that I came to know monkeys and their ways as I never should have come to know them otherwise. At first, it made me very uneasy to have them clambering about in the branches all around me, with their crazy chatterings and their lean and supple tails. They had a way of coming close and staring me almost out of countenance, and some of the bolder ones even poked me with their skinny paws. Their fingers were thin and inquisitive, and they used them for all the world like human beings. This made me both uncomfortable and envious. I did not think it fair for these wild creatures to have 10 whole fingers, while I must get along as best I could with my 2 clumsy wooden mittens. However, as I became more lonely and the monkeys grew more used to me, we struck up a sort of friendship. The kindliness and delicacy of their hands reassured me in time, and I came to enjoy the touch of their fingers when they stroked me curiously, as they sometimes did. There was one smallish monkey with a silvery white face and an especially active tail who paid me considerable attention. I almost came to understand his chatterings, and his visits helped to break the monotony of my days and nights. Once I remember he even brought me a present. I think it must have been a nutmeg. At any rate, it looked like those I have met with since on pantry shelves. I think he expected me to eat it, but though I was unable to show him my thanks in this way, I let it lie in my lap till one of his more mischievous mates made off with it. Bright tropic birds flew and sang about me, shining green lizards sometimes slid about my temple floor, and so I continued this life until the night of my rescue. Of this, I had had no warning whatever. Indeed, I had been able to learn nothing of the fate of my family, nor had I caught even a glimpse of them of late. I had no idea whether they knew where the natives had hidden me. I only hoped they did. Then one night, as my captors slept in a circle not far from my temple, I heard the unmistakable sound of stealthy human footsteps coming nearer and nearer. There was no moon, scarcely any light except from a star or two that showed through the branches of the palm trees. I had no idea whether it was friend or foe, but something told me that I should know before many more minutes passed. After a while, I felt a stirring in the branches below me. My temple was set rather high upon woven shoots, and these now began to shake perilously. I felt fearful that the savages might hear and become aroused. I had no wish to be in the midst of a skirmish, for those native clubs would make short work of me. Someone was drawing short, panting breaths quite close to me now. I felt them warm on my face. Then a hand closed around me. I felt myself being lifted off my perch and borne away, still in the hot, clutching hand. As we sped through the hot, soft darkness, something about that hand seemed to reassure me. I knew I had felt its touch before, and even in the midst of such danger, I felt more secure than I had in many days and nights. Now we had cleared the thicker palm trees, and I was able to make out the features of my rescuer. Dim, but unmistakably, Andy. He sped toward the shore, moving stealthily in his bare feet and looking over his shoulder every once in so often to make sure no one was following us. "Fooled 'em that time," I heard him mutter with satisfaction as he ran. Suddenly, out of nowhere, as it seemed, arose the form of Jeremy Folger. I could have wept for joy at the sight of his crooked back. "What you doing here?" he asked in a whisper. "I thought you was along of the rest." "I went back a ways after something." Andy spoke evasively and kept me behind him. "Ain't the boats ready yet?" "Most," Jeremy told him. "One sprung a bad leak, though. Looks like we'll all have to crowd in one, and that's not so good when it comes to making time." From more of their whispered words, I gathered that a vessel was in sight. At least it had been that afternoon. Captain Preble had dared not make any attempt at signaling or putting off in the boats for fear of rousing the natives, who had not been acting in any too friendly a way of late. However, it was now or never, they all agreed. It was a desperate chance, for should they not be able to reach the ship in time to signal for help, the natives would no doubt be hostile if they returned. It had been necessary to wait for darkness to get the boats out of hiding. Even now, there was no knowing when some savage might surprise them at their preparations and alarm the rest. Now we were on shore, in a small, sheltered cove, well hidden from view. I could just make out the dark shapes of Captain Preble and the rest. Phoebe and her mother were already in the stern seat of one boat, and the men were standing up to their thighs in the water, loading in the few belongings still left us. This must be managed with great care to keep the boat trimmed well. The captain spoke tensely. I knew from the tones of his voice that he was more worried than he would have admitted. When he caught sight of Andy, he began giving him a piece of his mind for having left them. "You're a fine sailor," he scolded, "running off at a time like this. If I wasn't so pressed, I declare I'd give you a whipping you wouldn't soon forget. 'Twould serve you right to get left behind to spend your days with the savages." Andy took this scolding in good part. But when the captain was through, he drew me out from behind his back. "I went after Hitty," he explained, holding me out. At this, Phoebe started up in the boat so that it rocked perilously. "Sit down, Phoebe," commanded her father. "Yes, it's Hitty right enough." He took me from Andy and turned me about in his hands a moment before he passed me on to Phoebe. "So that's what you were up to?" he asked Andy in quite a different tone. "Didn't you know you might have got yourself killed for touching her?" "Yes, sir," said Andy rather sheepishly. "But I found out where they was keeping her, and when Phoebe cried about having to go off and leave her behind, I thought I'd try to fetch her along." "It's a wonder we ain't all dead now," put in Bill Buckle. "'Twon't be no afternoon tea party if they find she's gone and put out after us." "Yes," I heard Jeremy agree. "Our lives won't be worth much round here once they find out, but I swear I'm glad he done it. That doll deserves a chance to get saved as much as the rest of us." "You're right," Captain Preble said. "Get in and pull for all you're worth, boys. And Andy, you sets far up on the bows you can and watch out sharp for lights ahead. That vessel wasn't making much headway this afternoon. I hope to heaven she ain't been beating it up any since." Phoebe had me in her hands again as we slid out into the waters of the little cove. "Oh, Mother," she sighed, "I'll never be cross at Andy again as long as I live. And when we get home, I'm going to give him my silver mug and porringer to keep forever and ever." "Mercy, child," her mother sighed. "How can you talk of things like that when we don't even know if we stand a chance of sighting that ship? And if we don't—" She did not finish her sentence, but I knew what was in her mind. It was perhaps the most dangerous of all the situations we had been in, for if that vessel had got out of our reach, we should be in a pretty pickle indeed. Once the natives found me gone, it would be certain death to return to the island. In that case, there would be nothing left to do but float at sea till our supply of food and water gave out, or we all went to the bottom. I knew all this, and yet, despite everything, I would not have exchanged my place in Phoebe Preble's lap for the most beautiful temple of ivory and sandalwood ever fashioned by the most admiring tribe of savages. But I suppose that is the nature of dolls. I am sure anyone would have felt as I did during that long, eventful night. It was very crowded and uncomfortable with all of us in the boat, and it sat so low in the water that a particularly big wave often drenched us. I did not mind this so much as the others, however, for I hoped these wettings would remove some of my outlandish berry juice decorations before it was light enough for Phoebe to see them. There was very, very little wind, and while this made it useless to hoist our small canvas sail, still it meant that the other ship would have to tack and veer to make any headway. If conditions continued like this and the men could keep steadily at their oars, the captain thought our chances of hailing the ship were about even. They worked in shifts. First the captain and Jeremy would pull at the oars and the others steer and keep a lookout. Then they would change about, and Bill Buckle and Reuben would row while the others watched and kept us on our course by means of the small compass. Captain Preble had his lantern in readiness. Fortunately, he had kept it safely with a small supply of oil, which he had hoarded against just this need. He had his flint and steel in his pocket, and the moment the ship's light was sighted, he intended to begin signaling. The stars that hung low on the horizon often confused even such seasoned old sailors as Bill and Jeremy into believing they saw the longed-for light. After each such mistake, the spirits of all in the boatload would drop, though the men never slackened at their posts. The warm tropic water was alive with the most brilliant phosphorescence I have ever seen. Each time our oars dipped and rose again, they made showers of shining miniature stars on either side. Phoebe said they were fish's eyes looking up at us from the dark water. But her mother did not think much of the sight. She said it made her dizzy to look, and there was only one light that would do us any good. And still the men pulled on, and still there was no sign of it. Worn out, Phoebe fell asleep at last against her mother. I continued to stay bolt upright in her lap, for I could not but feel still that much depended upon me, though in this case I must admit that all the credit went to the men as they bent and pulled with aching arms and backs. We'd ought to sight her any minute now, the captain kept telling them, but as the minutes turned into hours and still no masthead lantern loomed ahead, they grew more and more silent, pulling doggedly and wasting no breath on words or questions. Andy lay huddled in the bow. I supposed he too had fallen asleep when suddenly he gave a cry. "There 'tis," he shouted, "on our port side, plain's anything." "He's right," Jeremy affirmed. "I can just make her out." Instantly, the men were all alertness again. They gave a shout or two to express their feelings and then bent to their oars with renewed vigor. Mrs. Preble trembled, and Phoebe woke and hugged me close for joy. "She's still a good ways off," Captain Preble said, squinting through his glass. "Give me that oar, Reuben, while I lash the lantern to it." After this had been done, he began trying to light the wick. This took some time, and he cursed and muttered under his breath as he struggled. Finally, he had it lighted, but it flickered feebly. "That'll never do us no good," he decided as he watched it. "Wick must have been poor to begin with, and I guess salt water ain't improved it any. Whose shirt'll we burn first?" By this time, there was very little clothing left to any of the party. Reuben had gone stripped to his waist ever since we had left the Diana Kate. Bill Buckle's shirt had fallen away to nothing on the island, and Jeremy's was little more than a tattered lacework on his back. However, he peeled this off and handed it over without a word. Captain Preble poured on it a little of the precious oil from the lantern, and soon it was blazing on top of the hoisted oar. When it was almost gone, the captain went the same way. After that, his wife removed her petticoat. That burned for a long time, and made a fine blaze once it got going. In the queer high light from these makeshift torches, I could see the men's faces streaked with sweat as they pulled toward our goal. They were very tired now. Each stroke was slower and more of an effort than the last, in spite of all they could do. And still that light showed only like a far star beyond our port bow. "Seems like we'll never get there at this rate," Andy said at last. "Ain't they ever going to sight us?" It was the same thought in all their minds, but none dared venture more, lest they lose what little strength they had left. It even seemed to me that the light looked farther away than it had an hour or so before, and I knew that if this were true, and they did not sight our flares before daylight, we were indeed in a sorry plight. I think I must almost have read the thoughts going on in Captain's mind, for presently he said, "Oil's most gone now, so bring out what you've got, and we'll make one more try." I wondered what more the men could give, since by this time they were nearly as bare as the natives. Mrs. Preble must have wondered too, for I heard her speaking above me. "Here, Dan'l," she said, "take my bonnet and shawl, and here's my other petticoat too. This ain't any time to worry over appearances." The captain collected these, and Phoebe's little muslin waist. I saw Mrs. Preble give a last regretful look at the shawl as it lay between her feet. It was her best, and she had tied her belongings in it when we left the Diana Kate. Somehow it seemed like our last link with the old days. She watched it soaked in the oil and set alight without a murmur, and none of us saw anything funny in the sight of her beaver bonnet blazing away along with it on top of the oar. They made a great light as the captain and Reuben held it hoisted as high as their arms could reach. "If that don't fetch 'em, we might's well throw the oars overboard and ourselves after 'em," I heard Bill Buckle say to Jeremy in a low tone. I would gladly have offered my chemise too, but common sense told me that it would make no more light than a firefly. Now the torch was burning out. When the last flame wavered and failed, I saw Captain Preble drop the little knot of shriveled black cloth into the water. No one moved or lifted a hand to the rowing. We all realized there would be no use in that. Every eye was fixed on that far speck of light that meant so much to 7 souls and a wooden doll. Suddenly, I saw the captain's hands go out in a quick gesture. Another light had appeared beside the other. Now another, and another shot up. "They've sighted us. Praise be," he cried. "They're sending up flares to tell us they're coming." He was trembling so he could hardly reach for the oar. Reuben had slumped down in his seat with his face between his hands, and Bill Buckle and Jeremy were sobbing, like Mrs. Preble and Phoebe. I would have cried too, if I had been able. Chapter 8, in which I am lost in India. We were taken aboard the Hesper about daybreak, and before long we felt almost as much at home there as on the Diana Kate. She was a trim, well-built vessel engaged in the India and China trade, though lately crippled in a severe storm. This accident had sent her miles out of her proper course, and the captain and crew had been forced to put in at a remote harbor to repair damages. So when we sighted her, she was proceeding on her way with a makeshift keel. Her captain hailed from our part of the world, from Fairhaven, in Massachusetts, if I remember right, where he had left a wife and children. A more kindly or courteous man never sailed the seas. I shall always hold him in grateful remembrance because of the gallant way in which he offered his best silk handkerchief to wrap me in when Phoebe showed him the sorry state of my wardrobe. It was a voluminous handkerchief of rich crimson silk, with anchors and twisted ropes woven all around the border. I had need of every inch of it, too, considering that the natives had left me only my chemise. The rest of our party were less well fitted out than I. The men accepted any shirt or trousers that could be spared, regardless of size or fit. And Mrs. Preble concocted 2 queer-looking garments for herself and Phoebe from a length of calico. This had been brought along for possible trading with natives, and was therefore gaudy beyond all description. "I'd be run right out of meeting at home if they ever found out I'd put such colors on my back," she said when it was brought out. Still, it was cloth, and she managed to cut and sew it with the coarse sail needles and thread the men furnished. There was not any too much material, and Phoebe's dress resembled a walking piece bag when she had it on. Captain Preble promised, however, that we should all be fitted out at our next port of call. He still had the little bag of gold which he had worn about his neck ever since we left the Diana Kate. It was the only ready money he would see for many a long day, he said, but he was not one to hoard it at such a time. He and his 3 mates used to sit by the hour, dolefully figuring up what our losses in sperm oil must amount to. Still, it's a mercy we're alive to tell the tale. Someone would always remind the others sooner or later. It was much cleaner being aboard a trader than it had been in our whaling days. Considering that we had lost all but our lives, it was amazing how well our little party kept up its spirits. The crew were a friendly lot, and Phoebe and I were soon on excellent terms with them all. She liked nothing better than to recount my exploits to an admiring group of sailors, and though she had removed all traces of my berry juice stains, she would point out just where these had been. The men appeared quite impressed. "'Tain't every doll has had her advantages," they agreed. "You don't think maybe she'll miss being an idol once you get her back home?" They need have no fears on that ground. Our next port would be Bombay, and we soon began making many plans about what we should buy there. The Hesper's captain had promised to bring his little girl a string of coral beads, and he said that Phoebe should have one too. Andy wanted a knife with an ivory handle, and Captain Preble said his wife should have the handsomest shawl they could find to make up for the one that had been burned in the longboat. There had been so many delays and accidents all round that no boatload of people was ever more anxious to make port. Never, I am sure, has a more joyful cry gone up at sight of land than the men's when at last the long-looked-for coastline appeared. "Now," said our new captain as we came to anchor, "we'll take the day off, and I'll go ashore to see the folks and fashions." Such a host of little things come back to me as I think of that day. The queer boats, the domes and narrow streets, the whining beggars, and the throngs of robed and turbaned men who walked with a smooth sureness of foot I have never seen in any other place. Sometimes we passed half-naked men with their legs or arms tied up in knots, or with their bodies twisted in a manner both grotesque and horrible. Fakirs, they call them, the captain of the Hesper told us. Horrible, gasped Mrs. Preble as we passed close to one old man who had let his arms grow together in a way that made one shiver. It's plain indecent, that's what it is. Come right along, Phoebe, and don't look at such sights. One of the crew knew his way about the city well, and could even speak enough of the native tongue to get us about and our purchases made. After all those months at sea, it was no wonder such an expedition went to all their heads. I began to grow worried, fearing that there could not possibly be money enough to pay for all they were buying. By noon, we had collected embroidered India muslins for best, more durable cotton prints, and the most marvelously patterned cashmere shawl to take the place of the old one. Besides, there were all sorts of trinkets, for whatever caught Phoebe Preble's fancy sooner or later managed to find its way into her hands or her father's pockets. She soon had strings of silver and coral and little twinkling shells. There was even a string for me, of round red coral. Our guide swore it had been intended to be worn as a nose ring, but it was a perfect fit for my neck. They all declared it became me wonderfully, and Phoebe felt sure that when my new India muslin was made, I would be quite a Queen of Sheba among dolls. Alas, how little did we guess that this was to be our last day together. And so the hours passed as one strange sight after another beckoned us. I shall never hear distant bells ringing without remembering the sound of some far ones I heard that day. I suppose they came from an Indian temple. We saw elephants and tigers and sacred white bullocks being led in a procession through the streets. We bargained and gaped in dim bazaars, and the rest of the party ate rice and curry and sweetmeats in a place the sailor knew, where men made weird music all the time with little drums and reed flutes. Indeed, we saw and did so much that by mid-afternoon Phoebe Preble began to lag behind the rest and complain of being tired. Since there were still many things to be bought, and the two captains had much other business to attend to, it was decided that Bill Buckles should take Phoebe back to the Hesper. We were still a long distance from the harbor, and the child was so tired that Bill took pity on her and decided to give us a ride back. He took her up in his arms, and soon we were jogging comfortably well above the crowds of brown people. This afforded me a fine view. I could see over Bill's shoulder and miss nothing of all that was passing. Not usually being in a position so fortunate, I made the most of it. I felt very well content, as is so often the case when we have the least reason to be. I shall never be sure how it happened, but I think the steady motion of Bill's long strides, added to the long, hot day of excitement, must have proved too much for Phoebe. Her head dropped lower and lower till it rested on Bill's shoulder, and she was as fast asleep as if she had been at home in bed. Bill Buckles strode on, carrying her as easily as if she had been a bundle from one of the bazaars. As for me, I dangled now from Phoebe's hand, which hung over his shoulder. It was a rather precarious position, and I knew it. Still, I did not realize my actual danger till I felt myself slipping from her hold. I made one vain effort to steer myself against Bill Buckle and so attract his attention, but I could do nothing to help myself. I fell free of them both, flat on my face, in an unknown gutter. The stones were so hard, and the fall so unexpected, that I lay there in a daze for I know not how long. My wooden frame shivered from the impact, and the thick foreign mud rendered me almost senseless. Still, I was well aware of the disaster that had overtaken me, especially when I recalled Phoebe's sleepiness and knew that it might be the better part of an hour before she awoke and missed me. Innumerable brown feet passed close by, some even over me, but as most of them were swift and bare and I lay in a hollow with so much mud, I was not seriously hurt. However, when I thought of the elephants I had seen passing earlier in the day and remembered the size and clumsiness of their feet, I felt in no way reassured. The babble of strange voices uttering heathenish gibberish above me only added to my misery and despair, though I strained with all my might to catch the sound of a familiar voice and words that I could understand. Lost in India, I thought to myself. I, who have so miraculously survived the elements, not to mention those island savages, to perish like this in a foreign land. I could feel my new coral beads about my neck. They were round and smooth, and I knew how fine a color they had been when Phoebe chose them for me from among the others in the bazaar. We had both felt so proud then. Now they were as ashes and brimstone to me. How gladly would I have exchanged them for the welcome pressure of Phoebe's thumb and forefinger. Common sense told me that even should my absence be discovered soon and a search started, it would be well nigh impossible to find me where I lay. Still, I continued to hope on, as who would not in such a predicament? No, I never saw Phoebe or any of the Preble family again, though once I did hear news of them in a roundabout fashion. But that belongs to a later chapter. She must be dead a good many years now, even if she lived to be a very old lady, for that was over 100 years ago, and she was not made of mountain ash wood. How strange it all seems, and yet the cross-stitched letters of my name that she worked so carefully into my chemise are still plain. I hear people remark upon them as they look me over in the antique shop. But to return to Bombay and the gutter. My next recollection is of being lifted up by long and supple brown fingers. These belonged to a little brown old man in a turban and rather ragged flowing robes. The captain's red silk handkerchief, in which I had been wrapped when Phoebe dropped me, had evidently attracted the attention of his wonderfully keen black eyes. At any rate, he picked me up, turned me this way and that, seemed about to toss me away again, then changed his mind, and finally, wiping me off on a corner of his voluminous robe, bore me away with him, I knew not where. The next thing I knew, I was upon the hard stone floor of a small room. It was dark now, and only a little moonlight came in through a high, grated window. I was lying close to a large wicker basket from which issued the most extraordinary rustlings. They were like no others I have ever heard. I cannot describe them more than to say that they filled me with foreboding. I felt sure that no good whatsoever could come out of that basket. Indeed, I would have given my coral beads gladly to be well out of its way instead of so near it. Presently, in the dim light, I saw the turbaned Hindu, who had taken me out of the gutter, appear with another turbaned figure. Together, they crouched on the floor nearby, and from under his robes the Hindu produced a native flute or flageolet. It was made of bamboo, I think, and gave out a thin, reedy sound, almost as weird as the rustlings. I cannot describe the feelings that this music gave me. It seemed to produce strange sensations in all my pegs. I had had no idea that I could be so completely sad just from listening to certain sounds made over and over by blowing into a bit of hollow wood. And then the basket became alive with further unaccountable rustlings. I saw the cover quiver and rise a little. Meantime, the sad, sad music continued. I was unhappy enough in my present situation without this. Still, I could not but continue to stare at the basket lid in horrified fascination, as it was slowly raised inch by inch from within. At last it was shoved more forcibly back, and I saw the head and lithe body of a great hooded cobra. Jeremy had pointed one out to Andy earlier in the day, but that had been safely behind the bars of a cage. There was nothing but the queer music to restrain this one. Horrified, and yet at the same time fascinated, I watched it uncoil itself, slip out of the basket, and begin to creep toward the Hindu. Now he stopped his music an instant, and the snake also stopped, even in the midst of a glide. Now he would begin to play more quickly, and it would increase its pace. It was as if the music willed it to do this or that, and the slippery, coiling creature could not but follow its commands. As it swayed, it would move its head with its layers of skin fold on fold, slowly from side to side. I saw the glitter of bright, lidless eyes and the flicker of a darting tongue. I heard its scales making a faint scraping sound on the floor. Once, even, it came very close to me, so close that I felt part of its chilly body slide across my feet. At the touch, I stiffened till it seemed I must surely crack in two, and had it not been that my hair was so firmly painted on my head, I have no doubt that but it would have stood on end. Still, as I have said, one can become accustomed to anything in due course of time, even to great hooded cobras. I was never to be exactly upon friendly terms with this creature, but after several days I came to take him more calmly. I learned that the Hindu held him completely in his power, and that, after all, he was a rather patient and long-suffering snake, going through his paces as many times a day as his master directed by means of the flageolet. Stouter dolls than I might have quailed at being pressed into service by a Hindu snake charmer. I cannot say it is a stage of my career that I enjoy remembering, but at least I comfort myself with the thought that I did not behave in any way which would bring disgrace upon my kind. My role was a passive one, to stand by like a sort of image while the Hindu and his snake went through their strange capers. I even traveled about in the snake basket, though, let me hasten to add, in the compartment which contained the food and cooking things, not the cobra. Being a snake charmer in India in those days was apparently not a way to make much money. I am sure the Hindu would not have taken me on as a performer in his troupe if I had needed any food. He himself ate mostly boiled rice, and when we were in country places, the cobra managed to take care of his appetite with lizards, flies, and the like. Perhaps this was one reason why we traveled about so much, but I suspect it is the way with all snake charmers to be on the move. At any rate, we must have gone nearly the length and breadth of India, or so it seemed to me, before I heard a familiar word or saw a white face. Once more, time meant little to me, and it may have been years, or again only a few weeks, that I journeyed in the wicker basket. At any rate, I had grown quite discouraged over the state of my affairs. I had abandoned all hope of rescue, and felt that I should end my days in heat and dust, far, far from my native state of Maine. Which only goes to show how little any of us can tell about our own futures. At last, one afternoon toward sunset, when the day had been a shade more hot and dusty than usual, we stopped by a long, low building that somehow wore a different look from the rest of the town. Quite a group of native children and others gathered about the Hindu. Soon he had his flageolet at his lips, and the snake was being put through its paces. As usual, I had been set out beside the basket, still wrapped in the rather dingy and tattered red handkerchief, and my chemise and coral beads. And then, quite without warning, just as the cobra was sliding toward its master before the eyes of the straggling crowd, I heard a voice saying words that I could understand. They were very simple words, but I can never say what a combination of homesickness and relief they brought to me there in that place. "Hurry, my dear," was what I heard. "We shall be late getting home." At that moment I saw a man and a woman draw near. They were brown, but no darker than the Prebbles had been on the island, and their clothes, though very plain and rather faded, were like those at home. For a moment I feared they would pass by. Something must have attracted the woman's attention, for she motioned to the man to stop. They stood together, a little on the edge of the crowd, watching the snake and his master perform their queer antics. Suddenly, I saw the woman touch the man on the arm and point toward me. I realized that they had noticed me, and there I was, unable to move so much as a single peg, to express my joy or to beg them to rescue me from my plight. But once again Providence, or the power of Mountain Ash Wood, intervened. I heard the lady saying, "I am sure it is not an Indian doll, William. Look at the expression and her hair. She couldn't have been made anywhere but at home." "I declare she does have a familiar look," he agreed. "What would you think of getting her for Thankful?" "I was just thinking of her," said the lady. "Here she is growing up so far from home and not even a doll to play with. I suppose it is rather dirty." "Well, we ought to be able to remedy that," he answered with a smile. "Think of all the souls we came here to wash clean of their sins." I thought the lady seemed more interested in my appearance than in what he meant, and I must say it seemed a far more important matter to me then. To this day I shall always believe they did as much good by restoring me to my proper place as a doll as they did by all their baptizing and hymn singing. The man could speak the Hindu's language, and soon he was bargaining for me. It took some time, and I had fears that the Hindu would not accept the sum offered. Finally he did, and I was handed over to the lady, who kept me wrapped in her handkerchief as if I had been a leper. Still, I was in no mood to criticize. I submitted with good grace to a scrubbing with soap and water as thorough as I have ever endured. During my overhauling, I listened to various scraps of conversation and learned that I had fallen into the hands of some missionaries who had come out to this remote station in the hills. Here they had established a church and school, and here they helped nurse and convert as many natives as possible. Their only child, Little Thankful, had been born here, and it was for her that I had been bought. "It's just as I said," I heard her mother tell her father after my scrubbing. It makes me homesick just to look at her honest American face." "Yes," said he. "Now you've got her clean, she resembles my sister Ruth back in Delaware." "I mean to dress her just the way I used to when I was a little girl," his wife went on. "So Thankful will get used to something besides robes and turbans before she goes back." This must have belonged to some other child, for see, William, here's her name worked in cross-stitch on her little chemise. It's real fine linen, and I mean to wash it out myself. She must have been with nice people. Poor thing. I wonder how that dirty old snake charmer ever got his hands on her." "God moves in a mysterious way," he responded. "I must confess that it has touched me strangely to have this little doll cast upon our very doorstep just in time to answer our own child's needs. If it would not seem like too great a liberty to take, I could find it in my heart to preach a sermon about our finding her when we gather for prayers tonight." "I think I should wait, William, if I were you," his wife cautioned. "I should not want Little Thankful to find out about her till we have her dressed and ready for the child's birthday next week. High time she had a doll to tend." So I was to appear at a birthday celebration in the near future and belong to a little girl again. I could think of nothing else that night as I lay tucked carefully out of sight in a sewing box where Little Thankful could not find me.